Subscribe to the channel for more tales like these.
Aita for keeping score of everything I've ever done for my husband. I'm a woman in my late 50s, married to my husband, early 60s. We've been married for 30-odd years. I have fulfilled the role of a traditional wife for much of our marriage, and I left paid work soon into our marriage. My husband is very successful in his business, and we live comfortably. All our children are adults now. My husband built his business from the ground up, and I was instrumental to the early success, which set it up to be what it is today. We were having lunch with our children when my son mentioned that his wife didn't want to be trad wife and do what I did to raise the kids. She raised concerns about how vulnerable a position it is, and that she doesn't want to solely depend on him for money. He wanted me to talk to her and convince her by telling her how it worked out for me. I said I understood where she was coming from, and being a housewife is incredibly risky and vulnerable, especially if he leaves her and she's been out of the labor force for a while. He countered that it had worked for his father and I because I trusted him as my husband to provide for me, and why couldn't his wife do the same? I told him I have a meticulous record of all contributions I have ever made to the family business, recently digitized with the help of my daughter, so that if the worst ever happened, I wouldn't be relying on the mercy of a man to feed myself. I told him I have made many contingency plans over the years to minimize the risk of being a housewife and compensate for my lack of pension and benefits I'd have had I not left the labor force. My son and husband were angered by this. Both said it showed a lack of trust, and my husband especially feels I've had one foot out the door our entire marriage and that my little escape plan included plans to shaft him of his business. I told him the fact that he refers to it as his business rather than ours is exactly why I kept those records and why I won't be telling my daughter-in-law to do what she doesn't want to do. It's a lesson I learned from my grandma. She was a trad wife at a time when many people were. She stood by my grandpa, gave him 5 kids and all she had. He left her for a 22-year-old with no money, no house, and nowhere to begin. My mother grew up in insecure housing and one temporary situation after another. No one gets married planning to divorce, so she always told my sisters and I to 1. Always have an escape fund. 2. Never allow your love for your man to blind you from how vulnerable you are if you have no income of your own. Aita? Top comments. First. NTA. That's legal savviness right there. What do men obtain out of getting their wives to entirely throw their financial security into the wind? Barring separation and divorce, what happens to the wife if the husband dies unexpectedly? Does she throw herself in a fire? End up living in the streets because the husband provided and now there is no provider and she has no savings, no plan? And what is this modern obsession for tradwives? In societies where it takes 2 salaries to care for a family? Son is a hole for not respecting his fiancé/wife's wishes. What if she wanted him to be a house husband? What gives him the right to demand of her what she won't give? Husband is a hole for not understanding that protecting yourself from very possible hardships that have very practical ramifications has nothing to do with not trusting him. It has to do with self-preservation. Second. They want the advantages of traditional living and the advantages of progress, none of the disadvantages, and apparently telling them that is bitterness. But they're the one getting angry at the fact that no woman wants to work 40 hours a week at a job to pay the bills and then spend the remaining 72 hours of the week where they're not sleeping doing all of the house chores and child minding, while hubby does nothing. The fact that they don't get that no woman would want anything to do with that deal is telling that they don't see women as people. Third. We thought that the mother instinct was so strong in women, we could treat them however we want, and they'd still give us sons/cannon fodder/low-wage slaves/taxpayers. Turns out, if we want babies, we have to take away rights from women. They were given the ability to choose, but their choices don't align with what we want. It's time for a return to the natural order. Kinda deal that is the rise in extreme right beliefs such as abortion ban, birth control ban/restrictions, ending no-fault divorces, etc. Fourth. I lived in Japan for several years and loved it. But I witnessed this personally, women being pressured into quitting once they had a child, women becoming the mother and totally subsumed once they had kids, women getting paid less than men even when they were doing as much if not more work/managing, and so forth. I understand from various data points that South Korea is even more sexist than Japan. So yeah, being a parasite single looks like a pretty good deal compared to you will now become sexless mother, while your husband stays out incredibly late constantly due to pressures from his boss, and probably has a side chick too. Fifth. Your mother would have been proud of you for doing exactly what you did. It was not underhanded or distrustful as you were accused of by your husband and son. A woman in a marriage is a partner and, hopefully, gone are the days of the wife not having any knowledge of the finances. The two of you built the business together and have equal stake, yet your husband is angry and does not acknowledge your contributions or your ownership. I think that shows that you did exactly what needed to be done for you. By the way, my sister's ex told her she had not contributed to their financial situation because she stayed home to raise their 4 boys instead of working outside the home. How can anyone honestly believe anything so ridiculous? Sixth. In the best case, it's a way to split duties and responsibilities. One person earns an income, the other cleans, cooks, and shares half of child-rearing. If both people establish clear boundaries and truly care about one another, this can work really well. In the worst case, the man has complete control over his wife, which can easily lead to abuse. In these cases, the man wants to be treated as God, with his wife serving at his feet. That's it. Women who give into the tradwife ideal believe they're living in the lap of luxury. They don't have to work and have everything taken care for them. They live in huge houses that are either brand new or recently got renovated, have designer clothes, travel to exotic places, etc. And I'm not saying there aren't women who truly live that life. But for the majority of women in this situation, that's not the reality. Seventh. The family law system exists to provide redress in that situation though. Sometimes it can be circumvented, but they are not powerless even in the worst-case scenario. I have seen men frequently evicted from homes that they ostensibly own via protection orders, with the underlying cases for abuse as often as not being made out. In Australia, the doctrine of special contributions has been thrown out, so in a marriage or de facto relationship where things were built up from scratch by a husband's income, outside of unusual circumstances such as wastage, the trad wife would be seen as having made a 50% contribution whether they are rich or poor. She would get an adjustment for the kids if they are still minors and end up with most of the property, alongside child support and possibly spousal maintenance. It is not perfect. It can be circumvented sometimes where, for example, the wife is not privy to the finances, there is dissipation of assets, minimization or concealment of post-separation income, etc. But equally, the husband can get the short end with unfounded allegations of abuse, no child contact and hence more child support. But my point is that trad wives are not powerless. Subscribe.